Now let's go ahead and talk about the health effects of sleep deficits and disorders. So, sleep deficits, whether they are from not scheduling enough sleep or other reasons such as insomnia, have major and large effects on physiological and psychological functions, including those listed on this slide. So, we know that with weight gain, a single night of short sleep or not getting enough sleep is accompanied by an increase in ghrelin. And ghrelin is a hormone that basically causes us to feel more hungry, right? And so we also, when we're not only feeling this, we also tend to get fatigued because when we're not getting enough sleep, when we're fatigued, we don't necessarily have all the energy to continue to exercise. So there's two things that with sleep that are kind of causing potential weight gain: hormonal shifts, so that ghrelin, increasing ghrelin, but we also have the fact that it just fatigues us, and so we can't maybe engage in some of those other behaviors that are positive for our weight maintenance or weight loss. Now, cognitive disorders and dementia. Research has found actually a really clear association between a lack of sleep and dementia. So during sleep, what happens is that our brain's actually able to kind of do like a cleaning process, right? So it removes this waste that's been built up throughout the day. And the brain actually shrinks, which is going to cause some space for those neurons in the brain to increase by about 60%. Okay? This is all very normal, but if we don't get sleep, we're not able to do this process. And so this washing away of harmful substances really doesn't happen. And some of these harmful substances, including this like amyloid proteins, those have been associated with Alzheimer's disease. And so what we know from science is that if we're not able to go through this nightly process of kind of washing away these substances, including these amyloid proteins, we're more likely to have a higher amount of these substances, again, including these amyloid proteins, which have been shown in the literature to be associated with Alzheimer's disease. So there's a kind of a nice link, or not a nice link, but a clear link between these lack of sleep as well as cognitive disorders and dementia. Now, depression and anxiety also has a link to loss of sleep or lack of sleep. So clients that are suffering from depression may sleep either too little or too much, right? It can kind of go both ways. And clients with anxiety often experience disturbed or inadequate sleep. So sleep disorders can also contribute to emotional health issues by making people more emotionally fragile. So you probably know when you don't get enough sleep, sometimes you are a little bit more agitated, maybe quicker to anger or quicker to sadness, whatever emotion it may be. So fatigue in itself can actually alter our perceptions of what's going on around us and can make some smaller problems seems like even larger problems. We also know with overtraining, right? So just like anything, without recovery, exercise efforts may be less effective, right? So same exact thought there. So we need that recovery. Cardiovascular disease and metabolic disorders, there's a clear link there too. So here's an interesting stat. People over the age of 45 who sleep fewer than 6 hours per night have twice the rate of heart attacks and stroke compared to people who sleep 6 to 8 hours. Okay, that's a pretty shocking statistic. Sleep deficits likely increase our risk for heart disease through a number of comorbidities. So this can include poor body composition, increased blood pressure, poor blood sugar, and lipid level regulation. So essentially what that says is this statistic of having a higher likelihood of stroke and heart attack is likely due to these other comorbidities related to a lack of sleep, okay? And also we know that a lack of sleep can influence our immune system. So having too little sleep can trigger an increase in our immune system, which is going to increase inflammation. And so this is actually helpful in acute ways, right? So acute inflammation is helpful because it's helpful in response to injury. But systemic inflammation, so chronically not getting enough sleep and this chronic high levels of inflammation can actually lead to a variety of chronic health problems. So sleep deprivation is associated with a lower response to vaccines and an increased susceptibility to infectious diseases. Both things not ideal. So let's talk about exercise and sleep. So there's a lot of literature on exercise and sleep. So in general, longer durations of exercise are associated with more positive benefits than shorter durations of exercise. So what's interesting is that the intensity of exercise doesn't seem to affect sleep differently. Although there is one caveat in that mind-body exercises, things like yoga, have been found to have a really positive effect on sleep. So to be clear, longer durations of exercise are associated with more positive benefits than shorter durations, and intensity doesn't seem to matter as much. An interesting question that you might get from your clients is, is it okay if I exercise close to bed? I've heard that doesn't, help with my sleep. Well, what we found in the literature is exercise close to bedtime doesn't actually seem to have a negative effect on sleep quality or quantity. And in fact, some research even can show that exercising within that window right before bed can actually improve quality of sleep. So as a health coach, we need to work with our clients to establish a regular kind of exercise behavior so that it works with your client and aids in their sleep, because every person is different. So just because one person can exercise right before bed and it works for them doesn't mean it works for the other person. So it's a little bit of trial and error. So we also know that exercise can help with making our body need and want sleep, right? So it increases the body's need for restorative sleep. Just because we have kind of these damaged muscles, we need to repair it and we need to replenish our energy storage systems. So there are several explanations for positive effect of exercise on sleep. So the first is that it increases the body's need for restorative sleep. Those are what I just mentioned, right? The second is that it improves mood and reduces feelings of stress. So improvements in psychophysiological state may be the most important contribution of exercise to sleep quality, because we have these neurobiological changes, and during those it kind of includes this change in neurotransmitter levels and this increase in parasympathetic tone. And if you remember, kind of going back to a few lectures and maybe your physiology classes, if we have this increase in parasympathetic tone, that is kind of our relaxation state, right? So it's going to help contribute to better sleep. It also establishes a regular routine. And if you know anything about health behavior change, right, we know that routine is really, really important. So regular routine is an important component of sleep hygiene. You're going to hear that term again. If exercise helps people establish a regular schedule, such as getting up at the same time each day, this also can help with sleep quality. And then lastly, increasing exposure to natural light. So exposure to natural light during the day can actually strengthen our circadian rhythms and our sleep cycle. So a lot of people will enjoy being outdoors during their exercise, and this can actually improve sleep duration as well as quality by improving their circadian rhythm. Also, we know that when you get outside, that tends to increase our feelings of pleasure and actually can reduce our stress, and both of those things can help with reinforcing our sleep patterns. So now let's pause and think about this term sleep hygiene. And there's two slides that talk about sleep hygiene, so it's an important term to know. Really, when we're talking about sleep hygiene, we're referring to habits that help promote adequate, high-quality sleep. So when you think about the term hygiene, those are things that kind of we do, behaviors that we do to help with our body, right? Our physiology. Same thing with sleep hygiene. Habits that help promote adequate, high-quality sleep. So let's go ahead and start with creating a relaxing sleep environment. So it's really important that we avoid working in bed, that we reduce the noise that's in that area. This can help with maybe things like noise machines or apps that can help with that. Having a really dark environment, so having curtains shut, certain types of curtains, wearing a mask, having a temperature. What studies have shown is a temperature between 60 and 68 degrees Fahrenheit can really help with that sleep environment. We also want to follow a consistent sleep schedule, and I've touched on that earlier, so we need to go to sleep and wake up at the same time each day. And there's more and more literature to show how important that is. So even on the weekends, if you want to sleep in for 5 hours, it actually will, if you've ever wondered why you feel actually sleepier after that, it's probably because you haven't kept your normal schedule. Following a soothing bedtime routine. So this can include pursuing relaxing, quiet activities before bed. So reading, taking a bath, listening to music. And this is recommended to happen between 30 to 60 minutes before bed. And then limiting exposure to bright light, especially blue light. And this is probably something you've heard of, right? There's been a lot of recent literature about blue light, and blue light can come from our phones, it can come from our TVs, it can come from our computers. So it's been shown, blue light has been shown to interfere with our melatonin production. And we know that melatonin is actually something that makes us feel more sleepy. So if we're exposed to blue light, that interferes with our melatonin production, and therefore we're less likely to feel sleepy. So it's really helpful to try to reduce the amount of light that we're exposed to. There's actually apps out there that can Based on the time of day, it will slowly start to darken your screen, whether that's your phone or your computer. So important things to think about for your clients. And then it's also important to try to be exposed to natural light early in the day. So we know that bright sunlight early on in the day will actually help our circadian rhythms, okay? Exercising daily, we already know that, we discussed that earlier. Sticking to a consistent sleep schedule, again, we talked about that. Avoiding caffeine and alcohol, okay, so that's an interesting thing. Some people sleep better when they give up caffeine entirely. Others are fine with caffeine early in the day, while others have such a high tolerance that they can have a cup of coffee right before they go to bed and it really doesn't affect them. So this really depends on your client and is a conversation you need to have with them and helping them notice their own patterns. So in general, people should try to reduce their caffeine intake and then determine what their tolerance is. Now, while alcohol can cause people to fall asleep, you maybe have experienced that yourself. You have a glass of wine and then all of a sudden you're, really, really tired. You need to go to bed, right? So alcohol can cause people to fall asleep more quickly. What we've shown is that sleep patterns during the second half of sleep can actually be disrupted, and you can actually wake up more, and essentially you get less deep sleep when you have drank or had some alcohol. So alcohol should be avoided by people who are kind of grappling with sleep problems. And then lastly, avoiding eating a large meal too close to bedtime. And again, these are maybe things you've experienced because when you eat a large meal too close to bedtime, you actually don't allow enough time, which is about 2 hours usually, for the food to actually leave the stomach and go into your intestines. And so that can cause you to feel really discomforted. It can also cause issues with falling asleep. So let's go ahead and pause here and do a quick little learning recap. The first question is, how does duration and intensity of exercise affect sleep? The second question is, why does exercise positively affect sleep? And then lastly, I want you to understand the term sleep hygiene and then how you can improve it. What are the conversations you're going to be having with your client if you use the provide illicit technique to help with sleep? So I will pause here and I will see you for the next lecture.